There are monsters that don't hide under the bed. They sit at your dinner table, say grace before meals, and call themselves family. My name is Eleanor May Carter, and I'm 78 years old, born and raised in the same dusty corner of southern Georgia where I still live today. Around here, folks know me as Miss Ellie, the white-haired lady who sells peach pies at the Saturday farmers market and never misses the Sunday morning service at St. Luke's. People wave to me on the street, ask how my grandchildren are doing, and sometimes stop by just to borrow sugar or a bit of comfort. They see the apron, the soft smile, the careful hands kneading dough, and they think they know me. But none of them know the truth I've carried for nearly 7 decades, buried deep under layers of politeness and homemade cobblers. You see, sometimes the darkest stories wear the sweetest disguises. Pain doesn't always scream. Sometimes it bakes, it folds laundry, it sings hymns with perfect pitch, and never misses a casserole drop-off when someone in town is grieving. I've lived my whole life performing normally, and no one ever thought to look beneath it. What I'm about to share isn't for sympathy. I've made peace with much of it in the way a tree makes peace with a lightning scar by learning to grow around it. But I think about the girls who are still learning how to hide their fear, how to smile without flinching, how to carry secrets too big for their small bodies. I think about them, and I know it's time to speak. This story doesn't begin with drama. It begins like so many others in towns like mine, with a good family, a hard-working father, a mother who gave everything, and a home filled with the smell of fresh bread. We were poor but happy, until the day we weren't. Until the day my mother died, and the man we trusted to watch over us revealed who he really was. If you've ever wondered what survival looks like in its quietest form, it looks like a little girl putting toast on the table the morning after her world ended. It looks like silence stretched over the years, stitched into every kind gesture, every Sunday dress. And even now, all these years later, I still carry that silence. But not today. Today I will tell you what happened, because if I stay silent any longer, then I'm still letting him win. And I've already lost too much to let that happen. It was the kind of rain that didn't come down in sheets, but settled into the air like a breath you couldn't quite exhale. Our little house on the edge of Pine Hollow sat quiet and still, wrapped in grey light and the soft patter of water on the tin roof. I remember thinking how strange it was that the birds had stopped singing, as if they too sensed something was wrong. Mama had been coughing for days, but that morning the sound had changed. It wasn't just a tickle anymore. It was deep rattling, like something sharp tearing at her lungs. When I went into the bedroom, she looked like she'd shrunk inside the blankets, her skin pale and lips tinged blue. She still tried to smile at me. That's the kind of woman she was trying to protect, even when she couldn't breathe right. Daddy didn't usually miss a day in the fields, not even for bad weather. But when he saw Mama, he didn't hesitate. He wrapped her up in blankets, placed her gently in the truck, and told me to look after Paul and little Anna until he came back from Fairhope Hospital. His voice cracked a little when he said it, and that's when I got scared. Really scared. I was 10, but I'd been helping Mama for years. I knew how to heat soup-change diapers and make up bedtime stories. Still, everything felt heavier that day. Paul was only 8, but quiet, like he sensed something he couldn't name. Anna, just 4, clung to my dress, asking if Mama would bring her candy from town. I nodded and smiled like it was all fine, just a flu, just one day. But the air felt wrong. Grandad was the only other adult in the house. He'd moved in after Grandma passed and had barely unpacked his silence. He was the kind of man who filled a room without saying much. Tall, straight-backed, clean moustache, and eyes that watched everything without blinking too long. He didn't say much when Daddy left, just patted his shoulder and said he'd watch us. I remember his hand resting there just a beat too long. I tried to keep the house feeling normal. I made sandwiches for lunch and let Anna play with Mama's old buttons in a jar. Paul sat by the window and watched the driveway waiting. I checked the clock every 15 minutes, willing the hands to move faster, willing Daddy to come back with Mama laughing beside him. But the rain kept falling and the sky grew darker. By late afternoon, the smell of damp wood and boiled potatoes filled the house. Grandad stayed mostly on the porch, smoking a pipe and staring into the grey. Every time he passed through the house, my chest tightened, though I couldn't say why. I just kept wiping the table, like maybe if I kept things clean enough, time would reverse itself and Mama would walk through the door singing. That day felt longer than most years. And somewhere inside me, though, I couldn't explain it. Then I knew we'd crossed into a kind of before and after. But I didn't cry. Not yet. I had little ones to look after. And Mama had asked me to be strong. So I was. The truck wheels made a low, sucking sound as they rolled into the wet yard, and my heart leapt with hope so strong it nearly choked me. I thought I'd see Mama's face behind the window wrapped in blankets, but smiling, maybe tired, but alive. But when Daddy stepped out alone, soaked to the bone, moving like an old man, I knew before he spoke. He didn't meet my eyes at first. He just stood by the porch steps, his hat clutched to his chest, like it was something sacred. The rain came down harder, but he didn't seem to notice. When he finally looked up, his face was pale and raw, like it had been scrubbed with tears. Mama didn't make it. That's what he said. Not much more, he didn't need to. The words didn't land all at once. They scattered across the floor like broken glass, and I just stared at them, not knowing which one would cut first. My knees didn't buckle. I didn't cry. I just stood there and nodded like someone twice my age. Daddy pulled me into a hug, his clothes wet and cold, his body trembling. I felt small against him, not because I was 10, but because I didn't know how to hold all that pain. Behind us, Grandad stood in the kitchen doorway, his face unreadable. He didn't say a word, just watched. The pipe was gone, the usual cloud of smoke absent, but something in his eyes made my skin itch. I didn't want to look at him. Not now. Daddy said he'd bring Mama home in the morning for the wake. He asked me to be strong to help with the little ones. I said I would, and I meant it. There was nothing else to do. Being strong felt easier than falling apart. That night I sat at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to bed. The lamp flickered, and the storm outside raged like the sky had broken wide open. I stared at the chipped plate Mama always used, still sitting by the sink. I wanted to believe this was a nightmare, that I'd wake up and hear her humming while she kneaded dough. Instead, I got up before the sun and started boiling water for oatmeal. I dressed Anna, combed her hair, and packed a small snack for Paul, even though school was closed. I laid out black clothes on the bed. I tried to remember everything Mama would have done. I didn't let myself cry. Not yet. Not when their eyes were watching. They were looking at me, and I didn't know how to explain death to children who still believed you came back after a nap. So I said things softly. I held their hands. I didn't say Mama was gone forever. I just said she was resting, and we'd say goodbye soon. Then I turned back to the stove and stirred. Because when the world breaks, sometimes all you can do is keep stirring. The rain was still falling when he poured the whiskey. I remember the way the bottle clinked against the glass, soft and deliberate, like he was performing a ritual. He pushed it across the table toward me, his eyes not meeting mine, just fixed somewhere behind my shoulder. He said it would help, said it would take the edge off the pain. I didn't want to drink it. Mama wouldn't have liked that. But Mama was gone, and the hole she left behind was already too big for me to hold. So I nodded and took a sip. The burn hit fast, sharp, and hot, crawling down my throat like fire. I coughed and blinked hard, but I didn't say no. He refilled the glass. I drank again. The second time it didn't sting as much. The third time I barely noticed it. I just wanted the ache in my chest to go quiet. Time got blurry after that. The edges of things went soft. His voice got quieter, and the walls seemed further away. He said I shouldn't sleep alone tonight, said I'd wake up crying. He stood and offered his hand, and I followed him without thinking. I should have gone to the room I shared with Anna. That's where I always slept. But my body didn't argue, and my mind was too foggy to protest. The hallway was dark. I remember the way the floor creaked under our steps, and how the lamp in the living room cast long shadows that moved even when we stopped. His room smelled different, like old wood and tobacco, and something bitter underneath. He closed the door behind us. My legs felt heavy, like they belonged to someone else. I didn't know where to sit, so I just stood there, swaying slightly the floor, seeming uneven beneath my feet. He guided me to the bed, gently at first. His hand was on my shoulder. His voice was low, almost kind. I remember looking up at the ceiling, trying to count the knots in the wood. My stomach turned, but I couldn't find words. The world was too quiet, except for the sound of his breath. There are things I've blocked out. Not because I want to, but because my mind won't let them stay. I remember weight. I remember heat. I remember the sharp panic that surged too late, and the way my hands couldn't push hard enough. I remember a voice in my ear saying things no child should ever hear. At some point, I must have disappeared inside myself. My body stayed, but I was gone. Like I'd been scooped out and tossed into a place without windows. I don't know how long it lasted. I only know I woke up the next morning in my own bed, next to Anna, who was still fast asleep. For a moment, I thought I had dreamed it all. That grief had twisted my mind into something cruel and imagined. But then I saw the blood on the sheet, felt the bruises on my arms, touched the dried tear tracks on my cheeks. And I knew. I knew it had been real, and nothing would ever be the same again. The morning light came in soft, slipping through the cracks in the curtains, like it didn't know what had happened. Anna still slept beside me, her small mouth open, her little fingers curled under her cheek. I lay there for a long time, not moving, staring at the ceiling, waiting for my body to feel like mine again. There was a soreness between my legs, a raw ache in my ribs, and a dull throb in my arms where his fingers had pressed too hard. But none of it hurt as much as the hollow inside me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even flinch. I just felt heavy, like something important had been carved out while I wasn't looking. I moved slowly, careful not to wake Anna. I changed out of my nightgown and hid it under the bed, stuffed in a pillowcase. I washed the blood from between my legs in the basin by the window, scrubbing until my skin went pink and then red. I didn't look in the mirror because I already knew I wouldn't recognize the girl staring back. Downstairs, the house was quiet. I could hear the stove clicking as it warmed and the faint creak of the porch swing. I walked past the kitchen, past where it had happened, and kept going. My hands shook as I pulled flour from the cabinet, but I still made biscuits the way Mama used to, pressing the dough flat and cutting it with the rim of a jelly jar. Daddy came in while the oven was still warm. His eyes were swollen, his voice flat. He told me he was going to bring Mama home for the wake. He asked me to watch the little ones. I nodded and said okay, and he patted my shoulder like I'd done something right. My body flinched at his touch, but I hid it with a smile. I wanted to tell him, I wanted to fall into his arms and let the words pour out. But every time I opened my mouth, my throat closed up. I pictured his face crumpling again like it had the night before. I saw what this news would do to him, and I couldn't bear it. Not on the same day he had to bury the woman he loved. So I said nothing. The house filled slowly with people bringing casseroles and pies. The women whispered in the kitchen. The men spoke in low voices near the door. I moved through them like a ghost, wiping counters, straightening chairs, answering questions with nods and quiet smiles. No one looked too closely. No one saw the bruise on my wrist beneath the sleeve. No one asked why I wouldn't meet my grandfather's eyes. He watched me, though. He always watched me. And I understood then what silence could cost. But I also understood what breaking it might destroy. That night, after everyone had gone and Daddy was asleep, I sat alone in the front room where Mama used to read to us. I folded my hands in my lap like she used to do in church and told myself I'd protect the little ones. I'd keep the house running. I'd make sure Daddy didn't drown in sorrow. I wasn't 10 anymore. I was something else now, something that had to grow up overnight. And the little girl who'd watched it rain the day before was already gone. It was 2 weeks after the funeral when he told me to come to the back room. His voice was calm, almost bored, like he was asking for more firewood. I was folding laundry in the hallway, and I froze mid-fold, the soft cotton of Paul's shirt suddenly feeling too heavy in my hands. He stood in the kitchen doorway, one hand resting on the frame, the other tucked into his pocket. His eyes were steady expression, flat. I shook my head. Just once. No words. Just that small, silent defiance. And in that second, everything inside me shifted. The air went cold. His jaw clenched. He stepped forward with slow, measured steps, like a hunter. I dropped the shirt and backed into the wall, my heart pounding in my ears. He reached out, grabbed my wrist, his grip like iron, and pulled. I tried to twist free. I told him no. I dug my heels into the wooden floor, but he kept dragging me toward the dark hall. My breath came fast, short bursts, like a bird beating its wings inside a cage. I knew what was waiting behind that door. I knew what he could take from me again. Then the front door creaked open. Boots on wood. Daddy's voice calling out, tired but calm, asking if we'd eaten yet. The sound stopped everything. Grandad let go, just dropped my arm like nothing had happened. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the laundry basket. My wrist throbbed, my chest heaving with quiet gasps. Grandad turned and walked toward the kitchen, slow and casual, as if nothing had happened at all. I stood there for a moment, pressed against the wall, trying to slow my breathing. Daddy came into view, arms full of groceries, talking about how the store ran out of cornbread mix. I nodded and reached for the cans without saying a word. That was the day something cracked open. I felt it. The fear didn't disappear, but it started to change. It turned into something sharper, a warning flare buried deep inside me. I hadn't stopped him, not really. But I had said no. And for one terrifying, beautiful second, he'd heard it. I was in the hallway holding a stack of towels when I heard Daddy's voice. It wasn't loud, but it had a coldness I'd never heard before. Every syllable landed sharp, like a nail being driven into wood. He asked Grandad what he thought he was doing, asked if he'd touched me. The pause that followed stretched too long. Then came a chuckle, low and careless. That sound made my stomach turn. I dropped the towels and moved closer to the edge of the wall, my breath caught in my throat. Daddy asked again, this time louder. The next words were a blur, but I heard enough. Grandad was saying something about me being lonely, about Mama being gone. Then the crash. A chair scraped. A thud hit the floor. Daddy shouting. Fists meeting flesh. Furniture breaking. I didn't look. I couldn't, but I heard every second of it. The thumps, the gasps, the silence that followed, deep and final. Then Daddy's voice again, quieter this time, shaking, but steady. He called my name. When I stepped into the kitchen, Grandad was on the floor, not moving. Blood pooled near his head, slick and dark. Daddy stood over him, his chest heaving, his knuckles raw. He didn't look at me right away. He looked at the floor, at what he'd done, then turned to me and said one thing: "Don't tell a soul." His voice wasn't angry. It was broken. He moved past me, brushing my arm as he went. I stood there frozen, staring at the body of the man who had destroyed something in me, and feeling nothing like I expected. No tears, no fear, just stillness. That night, Daddy buried him out back behind the woodshed, said he'd gone to stay with cousins out west. No one asked questions, no one missed him, and I never said a word. Part of me wanted to scream the truth. Part of me wanted to hold Daddy and thank him for seeing what I couldn't say. But mostly I just felt empty, like a chapter had ended, but the story didn't know how to move on. After Grandad disappeared, we didn't talk about him. Not at breakfast, not on Sundays, not even when someone in town asked where he'd gone. Daddy said he'd moved out west to be closer to cousins, and that was that. Folks nodded, maybe curious, but not enough to press. In our town, silence could be a kind of fence. The house grew quieter in a different way. No more heavy boots outside my door at night. No more waiting for footsteps that made my skin crawl. That alone changed everything. I slept a little deeper. I walked down the hallway without holding my breath, but peace didn't feel like I thought it would. Aunt Louise started coming by more often. She was Mama's sister, sharp-eyed and gentle in her own way. She helped with meals, brought cloth scraps for Anna's dresses, and sat beside me while I peeled potatoes, humming old hymns under her breath. She never asked questions, but she watched. I could feel her noticing things I didn't say. With Grandad gone, I became someone else. I rose earlier than anyone, made breakfast, packed lunches, and kept the house in line. Daddy buried himself in work, his shoulders stooped with something he never named. We didn't speak about that night, but he hugged me more, looked at me longer, like he was trying to say something with his silence. The fear didn't leave me all at once. It faded in pieces, slowly, like a bruise changing color. I was still startled by sudden touches, still avoided mirrors, still flinched when doors creaked in the wind. But I didn't feel hunted anymore, just tired, bone-tired in a way that no child should be. Survival became my routine. Get up, care for the little ones, keep the lies straight, smile at neighbors, pretend nothing was broken. Some days I almost believed it myself. But at night, when the house settled and the air turned still, guilt crept in. I wondered if I should have told someone, if keeping quiet had made me like him in some way. But then I'd hear Anna giggle in her sleep, or see Paul eating seconds at dinner, and I'd remind myself why I stayed silent. I was keeping them safe. That had to count for something. I told myself that over and over, even when it didn't feel true. The world outside kept spinning. The seasons shifted. We planted new vegetables in the garden. I started baking like Mama used to. And every now and then I'd catch Daddy staring out the window, his face full of shadows. We were a family stitched back together just enough to hold shape. But the seams never stopped aching. I was 22 when I finally told her. We were sitting on the porch, shelling peas in the late summer heat. Our hands moving slowly and steadily. The cicadas buzzed in the trees, and the air smelled like dust and honeysuckle. Aunt Louise had always known how to wait. She never pushed, never pried. Just sat beside me with that patient stillness, like she was holding space for whatever I couldn't yet say. That afternoon, something cracked open. I looked at her, really looked, and the words just came out. I told her everything. My voice shook. My hands didn't stop moving, as if I paused, I might fall apart. I watched her face the whole time, waiting for it to change, waiting for disbelief, or worse, pity. But it didn't. She reached over and took my hand, peas forgotten in the bowl between us. Her thumb traced a circle on my skin, and she said she was so sorry. Not with shock, not with horror, just sorrow. And then she said, "Thank you. Thank you for surviving. Thank you for telling her." I cried then, not the quiet kind, the shaking, breathless kind that comes when you've been holding something in for too long. She didn't let go, just held on while I unraveled in her lap like a child again. It was the first time I felt clean in years. Keeping that secret had twisted something in me. It made me doubt every good thing that came after. Love felt distant, joy felt suspicious, even silence felt dangerous. But that day with Aunt Louise, I started to believe that maybe my story didn't have to end in shadows. It didn't fix everything. But it was a beginning, a breath after drowning, a light flickering in the dark that didn't go out. And for the first time, I felt like I could walk forward without the weight crushing me from behind. I got married at 28 to a man named Howard, who knew how to listen with his whole body. He never asked for details I wasn't ready to give. He just made room for me to be who I was, broken parts and all parts. And we had one daughter, Grace. She came into this world with a loud cry and eyes that seemed to see more than a baby should. From the beginning, I promised myself I'd protect her in every way I hadn't been protected. Raising her helped heal places in me I didn't even know were still raw. I watched her grow with curiosity and confidence, and each day reminded me that it was possible to create something beautiful out of pain. She asked hard questions, and I told her as much truth as I could. Daddy passed when Grace was 10. His last years were quiet. We never spoke about what happened with Grandad. But sometimes when we sat on the porch in the evenings, he'd take my hand in a way that said he knew. And I forgave him even if he never asked me to. Grace grew into her name. She studied social work, started speaking out at schools, and ran workshops for girls who'd been hurt like I had. I went with her once, sat in the back of the room, and watched as she gave language to stories I'd buried for decades. I found my voice too in small ways. At church circles, with women who whispered things after service, eyes wide, afraid of being alone in their silence. I told them they weren't. That survival wasn't shameful. That it didn't make you lesser. It made you stronger. My life hasn't been easy, but it's been mine. I've built something steady on top of everything that tried to break me. And when I look at Grace, when I see the strength in her spine and the fire in her voice, I know the story didn't end in darkness. It found its way to light. If you're still listening, I want you to know this story wasn't just mine. If something happened to you, if you're carrying pain in silence, please hear me when I say you're not alone. There is strength in your breath, even on the days it shakes. You don't have to speak today. But when you do, someone will be there to hear you. If this story touched you, share it. Leave a comment. Reach out. Let someone know they're not the only one trying to heal.